is one that I believe most of us know as we prepare for Charlie's message. Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you'll get by. If you smile through your fear and sorrow, smile and maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through just for you. Just light up your face with gladness and hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may be ever so near, that is the time you must keep on trying and smile. What's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile. And even as we pray for peace in this beautiful world of ours, light up your face with gladness and hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may be ever so near, that is the time you must keep on trying and smile. What's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile. Smile. Never, 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 never stop smiling. Smile.
Any one of you able to resist that? Are you up for a challenge?
Sure.
So I have a question for you. Can you think of anything God cannot do? Think about that for a moment while I continue. There are few things more challenging than trying to teach children Sunday school. One Sunday, a Sunday school teacher was making the point with the children that God is omnipotent. In other words, God can do anything. All things are possible with God. And she asked the class the same question I just asked you. Is there anything you can think of that God cannot do? Well, you've all been pretty quiet, so I'm guessing you've been thinking about that question. Well, there was silence in that classroom too. But then a little boy raised his hand, and that upset the teacher. She thought she'd made her point so well that even an idiot would get it. God is omnipotent. But apparently that little boy didn't get it. With irritation in her voice, the teacher asked, well, just what is it God cannot do? Well, replied the little boy, God can't please everybody. Now, I'd say that was a thoughtful little boy, but he did miss the point. God can please everybody. However, God has granted all of us free will. Any one of us can choose to not be pleased. It's all a matter of attitude, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Now, a few of you have been around Crystal Coast Unity for so long, you can remember one of the earliest Unity ministers who came here to speak. You don't have to raise your hands because then you'd be showing your age. But how many of you remember Victor Williams? Now, Victor tragically lost his life to cancer a few years ago, but you know what? Right up to the last weeks of his life, Victor continued to speak and give workshops. Do you know what he spoke about most often? He spoke about the healing power of humor. Humor was almost an obsession with Victor. Now, some of you skeptics might be tempted to say, bah, humbug. If humor is such a healing influence, why did Victor die? Why couldn't he heal himself? Well, I'll tell you. I don't know. What I do know is that Victor used the last days of his life to spread good cheer to as many other people as he could. Now, you can answer this next question for yourselves. How did the quality of Victor's life in those last days compare with what it would have been had he spent his last days having a pity party? Now, King Duncan and Angela Akers have compiled a book they call Amusing Grace. And I love their subtitle, Humor to Heal Mind, Soul, and Body. Ministers and even therapists often counsel people that if they need to cry, they should cry. And if you ask a minister, he or she will probably tell you that both crying and laughing are therapeutic. Let's face it though, laughing is a lot more fun than crying. Therefore, humor can be one of our best coping mechanisms. In their introduction, Duncan and Akers tell us that laughter is not an occasion for merriment. Rather, it's an opportunity for the Heimlich maneuver. They support their assertion by stating that laughter causes spasms of the diaphragm, movements of the upper body, dilations of the nostrils, bulging of the eyes, and vibrations of the jaw. I guess those are all good things. Now, speaking of vibrations, that was a very popular subject just a few years ago. The kinds of circumstances we attract to ourselves depend on the vibrations we radiate into our environment. In Unity, we call this the law of mind action. Whatever you call it, just think how you are vibrating when you laugh. Now, again, speaking of vibrations, how do you vibrate when you're in the doctor's office? Or how about when you're preparing for surgery? There's actually been some research on this subject. With one group of patients, doctors played tapes with positive messages during surgery. You will feel no pain, and other positive messages. Blank tapes were played for a control group. Among the test group, there was less overall pain and nausea. On average, those patients went home a day earlier than those in the control group. And I just have to ask, has anyone ever done a test on the effects of the blank tapes? I don't know, but the statistics suggest that the blank tapes are a little bit dangerous. Now, the researchers concluded that doctors and others in the operating room should be very careful about how they talk around a patient under anesthesia. Positive comments are strongly recommended, while negative comments are discouraged. Well, duh. This idea has been kind of a cliche around Unity for more than 100 years. Now contrast the experience of that test group with what happened to this guy. He had surgery on the day President Kennedy was assassinated. As he came out from the anesthesia, he heard the doctors asking, "Is he dead? Is he really dead?" The man tried desperately to wiggle a finger, not knowing they were referring to Kennedy's condition, not his. That reminds me of a surgery I had. As I began to wake up in the recovery room, I saw myself surrounded by about 10 people all looking down at me. If you know me, you know that I'm not comfortable being the center of attention. And it got even more interesting when I picked the words flatline out of the background noise. What was that about? I never succeeded in getting clarification from the surgeon. We often say, be careful what you pray for. We should probably expand that to include, be careful what you joke about. Now, 2005 was a really interesting year for Beth and me. We spent a lot of time in doctor's offices, and I got scanned, poked and prodded, and I regularly had to give blood for lab testing. And I thought I was being funny when I quipped, I need another medical procedure like I need a hole in the head. Guess what? My next medical problem required me to get a hole in my head. It was a joke, God. I didn't mean it, honest. Now, you probably noticed that there are a lot of doctor jokes. Have you heard this one? How many doctors does it take to screw in a light bulb? Well, that's easy. Depends on whether or not the bulb has health insurance. And don't forget also that 50% of all practicing physicians graduate in the lower half of their classes. That's not a pleasant thing to think about in the waiting room. Actually, since I've come to North Carolina, I've gotten the best health care I've ever had. I like my doctor a lot, but it still helps to have a sense of humor. Now, in church, we often ask, what would Jesus do? According to the Bible, one day the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus said, and I quote, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Can you think of a better authority than Jesus? Now, Jesus was speaking to his disciples, but I've been told that everything in the Bible is a lesson for me. If that's the case, Jesus was speaking to me as well. Therefore, I have to wonder what Jesus was talking about. Now, the kingdom of heaven appeals to me, so I tried acting childish. That just got my friends to avoid me. I am an introvert, but not that much of an introvert. Having a few friends at least part of the time is a good thing. I had to learn the difference between childish and childlike. Let's face it. Children are beginners in life. And here's the point. And this is a quote from Shunryu Suzuki, a Japanese Buddhist who helped popularize Zen Buddhism in the United States. He said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. Children are beginners. Adults seem to be experts. Now, how about statistical proof that this is so? By 1980, adults laughed only an average of 6 times a day. Children, on the other hand, have been found to laugh up to 400 times a day. So I have to ask, what lessons have our experiences taught us that have got us to stop laughing so much? So let me paraphrase Matthew 18:3. Truly, I tell you, unless you change and laugh 400 times a day, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, here are a few other things to think about. How do you react when you or somebody else catches you making a mistake? Now, I don't know about you, but I went through a period in my life in which I seemed to have done nothing but make mistakes. And believe me, I heard about those mistakes. They made me feel foolish and unworthy. You know, beginners are naturally more prone to make mistakes than those of us who are more experienced. And that goes for ministers as well as lay people. One minister, fresh out of seminary, was assigned to his very first church in the wilds of West Virginia mountains. In his first week on the job, he was called upon to perform a graveside memorial service. Well, unfortunately, our fledgling pastor got lost on the way to the gravesite. When he finally arrived, it appeared as though it was all over and everyone had gone home. The workers were just beginning to fill in the hole. Well, the Reverend thought to himself, the deceased deserves the full service. And after all, that's what I came for. So he asked the workers if they minded stopping their work so he could pray. And he proceeded to perform the best burial service he'd learned at the seminary. The workers seemed to be very moved. But as the pastor was leaving, he overheard one of the workers say to the others, "That was a wonderful service. But it's the first time I've ever seen that done for the installation of a septic tank." Can you imagine how foolish that minister must have felt? But you know what? I'm willing to bet that he's gone on to a very successful ministry. You know why I think that? That minister didn't allow the embarrassment to get to him. He didn't emotionally abuse himself for being so stupid. I know that because he told this story on himself. I don't suppose this was the same minister who made this comment during the eulogy for one of the community's leading citizens. "We have here only the shell. The nut is gone." I suspect the deceased had never taken himself too seriously. Now that's a lesson I had drummed into me by my students. During final week in one of my early years as a teacher, I promised one of my troublesome students that he could teach the class if he passed the final examination. He shocked me by passing with flying colors. A promise is a promise. So reluctantly, I sat in his seat, and he went to the front of the class, and he performed the most amazing imitation of me. And I realized that a lot of the time I was teaching, I looked pretty dumb. I was blushing, and my ears were burning. Now, my students weren't sure they should laugh. I hadn't given them their grades yet. I, on the other hand, could not help myself. It had been funny, and I laughed. Then I congratulated my troublesome student for his marvelous performance. And he was very pleased with himself, and all my students walked out of the classroom feeling good. Now, Richard Carlson wrote a book called "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff," and it's all small stuff. And he filled the book with simple ways to keep the little things from taking over your life. That day in the classroom was the day I learned to not sweat the small stuff. Sometime later, another student tried to ridicule me in front of the class. I acknowledged what was said, congratulated the student for being so perceptive, and laughed as though it was a joke. And I heard somebody whisper, "He doesn't care." From that time on, we all laughed together. Students seemed more comfortable with me, and my life as a teacher got a lot easier and much more pleasant. It was Mahatma Gandhi who said, "If I had no sense of humor, I should long ago have committed suicide." And as Duncan and Akers point out, we need to step outside ourselves and see our lives as important, but not serious. And as the philosopher George Santayana said, there is no cure for birth or death except to enjoy the interval. When things don't work out, take a creative look at the situation. Find some humor in it. God has given each of us the ability to endure any hardship we might face. Besides laughing, our coping mechanisms are tears and heartbreak, numbness, and the passage of time. Take your pick. The wisest among us allow ourselves to have a chuckle along the way. If you don't believe me, just ask our resident laugh person, Betsy. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was going to be talking about attitude. Let's face it, humor is a matter of attitude. Having a sense of humor not only influences the vibration we put out, it puts us in control of the situations in which we find ourselves. Nothing we can laugh at will ever have any control over us. We cannot tense up our muscles while we're laughing. It's very difficult to feel hostility or stress when good feelings are flowing through our bodies and minds. Humor also promotes healthy relationships. The Danish musician and comedian Victor Borge said, "Laughter is the shortest distance between two people." When we share laughs, we automatically lower our defenses to the people around us. It provides opportunities for us to revel in shared experiences. To help another person laugh is to give a great gift. Rather strangely, most Muslims know this. The Quran says, "He deserves paradise who makes his companions laugh." I wish somebody would tell this to the terrorists who claim to be good Muslims. Having a sense of humor is more important in relationships now than it used to be. 80 years ago, men and women lived to be only 42 or 43 years old. The marriage vows, "as long as we both shall live," meant only about 20 years. Now, 4 out of 5 couples with senses of humor reach their 50th wedding anniversaries. As one wag said, love at first sight is nothing special. It's when two people have been looking at each other for years that it becomes a miracle. Now, I've been looking at Beth for almost 30 years. I believe in miracles. Now, most people dream of happy marriages, but for one reason or another, it doesn't always work out. After one husband's annual physical checkup, the doctor took his wife aside and told her, "Unless you do the following things, your husband will surely die. Here's what you need to do. Every morning, make sure he gets a good, healthy breakfast. Have him come home for lunch each day so you can feed him a well-balanced meal. Make sure you feed him a good hot dinner every night, and don't overburden him with household chores. Also, keep the house spotless and clean so he doesn't get exposed to any unnecessary germs." Now, I think you can guess how this is going to turn out. On the way home, the husband asked his wife what the doctor had told her. She replied, "You are going to die." Now, I thank God my wife is not like that. It was attraction at first sight, and I knew I was in love our 3rd time together. And I appreciate her more now than I did when we were first married. A love at first sight may be cool, but it's not as good as it gets now that I've gotten to know her better. And I agree with Joseph Choate, a one-time ambassador to Great Britain. He was asked who he would like to be if he could come back to Earth again after death. He answered without a moment's hesitation, "Mrs. Choate's second husband." Now, before his assassination, which caused so much consternation for that one surgery patient, President John F. Kennedy said, "There are 3 things that are real: God, human folly, and laughter. The first 2 are beyond our comprehension, so we must do what we can with the 3rd. Now, I've never failed to be amazed by the wisdom of the young. A different little boy came home from the same Sunday school class and was asked by his grandmother what he had learned that day. He said, "God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall have everlasting life." Humor is one of God's gifts to us because God loves us. And I love you too. And it's my wish that you feel better now than you did when you got here. And I wish every one of you an ever-laughing life. And that's no joke.
You never cease to amaze me. You never cease to amaze me. This one is simple. It's just thank you for your grace, your amusing grace. Thank you for your grace, my deepest gratitude and faith in your loving presence. I know that I am saved. Thank you for your grace, my deepest gratitude and faith in your loving presence. I know that I am saved. Thank you for your grace, my deepest gratitude and faith in your loving presence. I know that I am saved.
As we prepare for our time of meditation this morning, I quote to you from the book of Proverbs, chapter 17, verse 22. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a downcast spirit dried up the bones. So as we prepare to enter into the silence, I invite you to set aside all thoughts of the material world. As you settle into your seats, I invite you to move your attention from your heads to your hearts, to take time out from thinking, becoming aware only of feeling. And I invite you to allow my words to be your words. I let go of any need to be perfect. I accept and appreciate myself just as I am. I feel God's joy within me. And I share that joy with the people around me. I am enthusiastic about life as I express the joy of God. And I invite you to dwell on this affirmation in the silence. I am enthusiastic about life as I express the joy of God. Feel God's joy now in the silence. I am enthusiastic about life as I express the joy of God. And as we return consciously to our awareness of the outer world, I invite you to take with you this teaching from the book of Isaiah. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song. And that's no joke, but it can be a laughing matter.
You've got to give a little, take a little, and sometimes let your poor heart break a little. That is the story of, that is the glory of life. You've got to giggle a little, sometimes cry a little, and let the clouds roll on by a little. That is the story of, that is the glory of life. You know, as long as there are the two of us, we've got this world and all its charms. And when this world is through with us, oh, we will hold each other in the arms. You've got to win a little. Sometimes you may lose a little. And you should always smile a little. That is the story of, that is the glory of life. And when the world gets way too tough, you know, we have Crystal Coast Unity. You've got to smile a little. Oh, just laugh a little. Come on, just have a belly laugh a little. That is the story of, that is the glory of life. I said that is the glory of life.